Dude, I am so excited about this episode. This is like one of the better episode ideas, and I appreciate you coming up with it.
Well, golly, thanks, buddy. Yeah, I enjoy watching Ren's YouTube channel, or the YouTube channel that he's a part of. I've enjoyed it for a very long time. I enjoyed meeting and hanging out with Ren at ThinkerCon. We've kind of stayed in touch since then. And I saw something come across, well, I don't want to spoil everything, but I saw something come across the internets here over the last year, and I thought, Ren is the guy to speak to this thing. It involves special effects and pop culture and the future and social stuff. Like, this is the guy. So, yeah, I'm pretty amped about it, too.
Yeah, so, I mean, just to let the cat out of the bag, deepfakes, right?
Yeah.
The idea of being able to create a video that sells itself as being reality when it's certainly not reality. That's a big, pivotal thing, I think, for the future.
Probably like half the people sitting in the third chair right now are like, deepfakes? Those are so much fun. They got little apps on their phones that kind of do something sort of like a deep fake. There was a gigantic, iconic pop culture moment in the Star Wars universe here within roughly the last year or so that involved a deep fake that was amazing. Like, this is just going to be fun to explore these special effects and the technology. And then probably half of the third chair are like, deep fakes are very dangerous. They open up all kinds of ethical problems and opportunities for nefarious things to happen. And I would love it if we could talk with Ren about both sides of that.
So here's what's interesting about Ren. He's one of these people that I've watched them from afar for a really long time. And then I got to meet him, and he was just as amazing in person as he was, like, you know, everything I imagine. What I think is so interesting about Ren is that he's an engineer. Like, his brain works on an engineering level, very technical, understands the science, but he also has the ability to make things that are just beautiful and fun to watch, and he understands story and how to connect with people.
Yes.
He's kind of off the charts. He's not normal.
No, he's got a freak skill set. And look, I can think of 100 things that are completely screwed up and weird about you that need to be dealt with at some point. But one of the few things that I think is great about you is that you're kind of the same way. You two are sort of peas in a pod, in that you're both engineers. You both see the matrix and all the moving parts in ways that normies like me don't. But the thing that humanities guys like me, that we comfort ourselves with, we're like, oh, well, we bring something to the table too. Like, we understand narrative and story and people. You're also both really good at that. And so he's one of few people I've ever met who has a similar skill set to you in that regard. So I'm pretty excited to see what it's like when the two of you are in a room together.
Well, thank you for saying nice things, but I am excited to talk to Ren. And
don't think about that. Think about the dozens of mean things that I'm withholding, but that I'll tell you later.
No, I think this is a really interesting Venn diagram moment, because we've got, like, there's philosophical consequences to the idea of making these fake videos about people. And I don't know. There's a lot here. Yeah. I'm just excited to get Ren on the line. What do you think? Yeah.
Oh, well, let's just cue it up. We're going to get too far down the rabbit hole without the actual expert in the room if we keep going.
Hey, he's here, Matt. This is Ren.
Hey.
Sweet.
So, Ren, how do you say your last name? Weichman?
Yeah, close. Weichman. Like a
Weichman.
hard K, yeah. Weich.
Where are you from originally, Ren?
I kind of grew up all over, but I consider myself from the Northwest, so like Oregon and whatnot, Seattle, etc.
Oh, that's awesome. So did you grow up in... You just keep it nebulous, I guess.
Nebulous. I mean, I lived in Louisiana. I lived in Norway. I lived in Vietnam. And now I've been in LA for so long that I have to say that I'm from LA.
So you just packed up your things with a stick and a handkerchief and made your way from Vietnam to Southern California to chase your fortunes across the sea?
No, I had 2 handkerchiefs. It was fine.
There is a story about you just going to L.A.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you go to L.A. from?
From Portland, Oregon.
Why did you do that?
To become a YouTuber, I guess.
That was really the goal?
Yeah.
Really?
It was, from the beginning. So I had graduated in 2011 from college with a degree in mechanical engineering. And around 2 months before graduating, YouTube threw on this competition called YouTube Next Up. And over the course of the previous 2 or 3 years, I'd started learning how to do visual effects as a hobby. It was just a fun side thing. I had to kind of pause it because it was starting to impact my grades. But around that mark, YouTube put on the YouTube Next Up competition, and I became a finalist. And it was the first time that I actually sort of had my VFX hobby like validated, and realized, wait, I think I can do something here. I was already really enjoying it, and I decided, you know what? I would much rather be creating videos and making films and stuff like that than stress testing a bolt for the 100th time that's going to go on the wing of an airplane sitting in a cubicle.
Yeah.
Finite element analysis.
I did Next Up as well.
Oh, really?
So you
oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It was a little different for me. They called it the On the Rise contest, but it became Next Up.
Okay.
And I think that was 2011, 2012.
Okay.
I didn't have a clue what was going on, so I kind of fell into it. But you had an active plan. You set a crosshairs on a target, and then you took the shot.
I mean, more or less. I didn't make it that first time, but this was around the time that I was most inspired by two different YouTube channels. One was called Freddie W, and the other was called Corridor Digital. But yeah, I mean, I moved down here with the hopeful intent of working with Corridor, and within a few months of moving here, I managed to get a part-time job working as like the behind-the-scenes editor for Corridor. And I was responsible for like shooting and editing all of the behind-the-scenes videos for their main videos. And then after a couple years of doing that, because I had treated the whole experience like one big internship, because I didn't really know much about filmmaking other than like what I read about in articles and online. I didn't really read too many books about filmmaking. There's just so many resources available online. So between that and watching tons of tutorials, and more importantly, just trying it out, seeing what worked, moving on to the next thing. After a couple of years of doing that, I ended up kind of going back out on my own, trying to make my own thing happen, and then ended up about 8 months later, coming back to Corridor to work with them full-time as a main channel VFX artist. And so I've been doing that since about, I guess, the beginning of 2014, perhaps? Yeah.
Did they know you were a super big fan? Okay, like if Destin moved to Mississippi with the entire intent of working with his heroes, Mike and Carl do shirtless nunchucks on YouTube. Like, I'm guessing that he would be super socially awkward. He'd fanboy all over himself, and they'd be like, "You can't do shirtless nunchucks with us because you're just like you're weird and you make us uncomfortable." How did you do with that? Did you play it really cool? Like socially, was it all right, or were you kind of panicked and fanboying?
I mean, the first time I met them, there's definitely a fanboying element. I kind of accidentally fell into being in one of Freddie's videos while the one night I was there. They were shooting this Splinter Cell video. It was like a parody where they shoot at light bulbs and stuff. And I just happened to be there. They needed to release a video the next morning, and they were starting to shoot it that night. And they're like, "Hey, you're our goon now." And I was like, "Okay." I think back around that time, and I can't help but feel that I was very awkward. But I also just feel I was a more awkward person. Over the last decade of being down here in LA, I feel like I've kind of come into myself, accepting my own personality, accepting who I am as a person, and just letting my passion kind of take the steering wheel, I guess. I
think most people would say a decade in LA makes you much less awkward.
Perhaps, yeah.
I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a year.
Oh, wow.
I was watching the Mandalorian behind the scenes thing that they put out. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really nice. And it covered all the things that you'd expect. You've got Favreau and Filoni on there talking about narrative arcs and what they were going for with the characters. And all of that was very fun. And that's my wheelhouse. That's the stuff that I found interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, me too. It's great.
I just feel like characters are not intriguing anymore. They're overwhelmingly just, they exist to make a statement about this or that. I feel like on that show, you've still got some characters who are just characters, and wherever the winds may blow, like real people. And that's why I like the show. I thought it was fun. I will say, spoiler alert, just in case somebody hasn't watched The Mandalorian, like you're probably going to want to tap out for the rest of this episode.
At this point, they deserve the spoilers.
They do. Well, obviously, they spent a bunch of time talking about what went into the Luke Skywalker decisions in the final episode of season 2.
Well, hold on just one, just so we're clear, or so I'm clear. Are you talking about at the end of the episode where Luke Skywalker comes in and it's Mark Hamill?
Yeah, more or less.
It's not like the real like now actor. It's the actor from back in the day. So they had to create a young actor. Is that what you're talking about, Matt?
Yeah, so it looks like Return of the Jedi era Mark Hamill.
Yeah.
Motorcycle accident, scars and all.
Exactly.
I think he got into an accident.
Yep.
And I remember really wanting it to work when I saw the episode real time. And just wanting there to be no uncanny valley and wanting it to feel right. It was good enough in the moment for me to be like, I think I can just let myself enjoy this. This is a neat moment. This is pretty cool. It doesn't look like his mouth is moving right. I can just play along with that. Okay. And so it was fun. Everyone's in awe. You can only talk to people who've seen it for a few days because you don't want to steal that from somebody else. And then a few months go by, and I see a video that you put out taking another run at the Luke Skywalker sequence.
Yeah.
And it's really good, and it's really fun to see how you did it. I watched it a few times trying to really understand what was going on there.
Okay.
And I made a mental note. I thought, okay, well, clearly the Disney folks are going to see this. Those guys care more about making good content than they do about looking cool. I don't think Jon Favreau's an ego guy. I think he's a story guy and an excellence guy. And this is going to light a fire under them in a way that I think is going to be interesting. Well, and sure enough.
We have tangible evidence that I think it might have. They hired an actual deepfake artist who is one of the most prolific deepfake artists on YouTube. His name is Shamook. And, or at least his YouTube name is. I forget what his actual real name is. But they've now hired him, and that's about the extent of what we know publicly. And so I think they are going to be taking this deepfake stuff more seriously for season 3 of Mandalorian, or whatever else Disney and or ILM, does with this sort of technology, because it's very much so an evolving tech, right? It's so to kind of give you guys like a baseline of what they did for Mandalorian season 2, the very end with the Luke Skywalker. In the past, there's a couple different ways they would do it. There's the full CG route. They did this with Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia in Rogue One. They've also done this with the type of de-aging stuff that you would see in sort of the Marvel films, where you would have like an older actor playing a younger version of themselves. And that's kind of a lot of 2D work. It's a lot of motion tracking and photoshopping and very talented artists who know anatomy very well. Lola Effects is responsible for a lot of that sort of stuff. Then you have this new tech called deepfakes coming in, which is essentially just AI learning and understanding a face so well that it can replicate it under any situation. And that has this raw power to be able to do a lot of cool stuff, but at the same time, it's still computer code and it's not creative. It can't make its own decisions. It's just guessing based off of what training it's done. And so if you have limited input data, you're going to have limited output data as well. What's
garbage in, garbage out.
That was it. I was trying to think. What is it? Is it garbage goes in this side? No, you got it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and that's pretty much the crux of any sort of AI-related tool, right? You have these models that are trained off of things, and it's able to create things based off of that training. But if that training is incomplete, you're going to have an incomplete result. And so
kind of the plot of The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, sure. I guess. And so you're also trained by the experience of the artist. And so ILM is one of the best VFX companies in the world right now. There's a few of them that are at the top, and I'd say ILM is in the top 3. I don't want to say they are the top or number 2, but it's interesting. You have these VFX houses who their literal business model is to create visual effects, to create magic in cinema. And they're tasked with doing the impossible a lot of the time, and they figure out ways to do it. But also, they have a pipeline. When you're having to kick out thousands of shots, you can't be experimenting with unproven methods and stuff. And so you have to then fall back on your traditional methods that you do have a lot of experience with. And we kind of saw a weird hybrid with that on The Mandalorian. When I first saw this episode, it was literally a year ago, December of 2020, and I had to wait a day to see it. My wife was working that night, and so I couldn't watch it because I wanted to remain alive, and so I didn't watch it without her. So everyone in that 24-hour period had sent me or not sent me anything. They had asked me what my thoughts were on the end of the video. Most people didn't give me any spoilers. There were a couple who mentioned a Luke Skywalker, so I kind of knew something was up going into it. And my first impression was interesting. It wasn't like a negative or a positive. It was just like oh, there's something going on here. And so I guessed that they did not do a deepfake. It looked computer generated to me. It had this weird sort of non-deepfake sort of look to it, but at the same time, it kind of did. And I was so confused. And I became so certain that it wasn't a deepfake.
I want to put a pin in that because I want to ask you what I mean, for us, I don't know what that means. What's a non-deepfake look?
We know all these words, but we don't know the definition of the words in your mind.
Right.
So you're saying, oh, it could have been CG or it could have been deepfake, and that means something to you that it doesn't mean. Like to me, deepfake is it was a Reddit username that someone was using to create videos of people that weren't actually people. Okay, and we'll just leave it at that. And so that's what a deepfake originally, that's where the name got coined. Is that correct, or was it 4chan?
I don't remember, honestly. I'm not exactly sure.
It was one of those. It was somebody's username, and we'll just leave that in the past. And so that moved forward into a verb. It got transferred into a verb. And so deepfake is when you use artificial intelligence to try to recreate or wrap someone else's face on the movements of an actor.
Correct.
Is that an accurate way of saying that?
That is pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does CG mean in relation to that?
So CG is basically you have an artist using their own creative intent to recreate something, right? They're creating it from scratch. Now, they can have tons of reference. They could even have the source material at hand to be able to use. But at the end of the day, they're still rendering something which requires them to recreate the animation and the lighting. You know, you can use tons of different tools such as motion tracking, keyframe animation. You have VFX supervisors on set who are able to capture the sort of on-set lighting that you would have, the directionality and intensity and color of that light. And you can use those things to try to replicate and simulate what a face would have looked like in that situation. A deepfake, on the other hand, just looks at the footage and is able to determine the orientation of the face. It's able to literally infer the lighting, like I was saying, intensity, direction, color of the light on the face, and basically recreate that with a different face. And it does that through a couple different means. First off, it tries to learn how to recreate the face that it sees as accurately as possible. And so it'll go through tons and tons of iterations where the computer has two options. It has the original ground truth of what the face should look like, and it has its results. And then it compares them, and you get a sort of error average type deal. And then it's like, okay, I learned something from that. I'm going to try it again. And it gets a little bit more accurate, and then a little bit more accurate. And that's just trying to recreate what it's seeing. Previously, before you even start the deepfake, you have to do training on the face that you want to plaster on there. And so for that, you need to teach the AI model what this face looks like. So you want to just give it as many different images from as many different orientations as you possibly can, with as many different lighting situations as you possibly can, so that it has the best understanding of what a face is, specifically what that face is. So now you have an AI that is trained on a face that you want to put somewhere, and now it's training itself on recreating the face that it's looking at in the footage that you're eventually going to use. And then it'll do a third thing where it'll then plaster on that sort of face there, but this time it doesn't have a ground truth to compare it to. And that's where the artist comes in and decides and determines whether or not that face is good enough for a final result. And at the end of all of that, once it's done millions and millions and millions of calculations and iterations, I should say, a ton of iterations, you eventually end up with this exported face. And it's literally just a mask. It's like the bottom of the lips to the top of the eyebrows. And it's just a rendered out image with transparency around it. So it's not the full head, it's not the full shot. And then you just layer that on top of the footage. And most of the time, it kind of just works. The tells for me for deepfakes are when the training data isn't quite good enough and you end up with weird sort of artifacts, such as the eyes looking in slightly different directions, or like the teeth kind of like moving around. Like sometimes you end up with like a little middle tooth, and then you can kind of see it sliding around as it's trying to determine where the teeth are. And so it kind of struggles with some of those weird subtle details, but is very, very good at getting animation and lighting right, which is most of the battle.
You know, speaking of battle, the analogy that was happening in my head as you were talking, I've spent some time with machine learning, and building the library is the hard part.
Yes.
That's one of the many hard parts, and that's where the intellectual value is, the intellectual property. But your explanation of that felt like someone in an F-16 flying over a World War I trench warfare battlefield. Like you just like you just kind of like there was so much information that you passed over, like inference and like all these different things. You have deep knowledge in this area, and you're trying to dumb it down so we can understand it. Is that accurate?
Well, I would also like to clarify, I am absolutely not an expert in machine learning or deepfakes. Nico from Corridor is our resident sort of deepfake expert. He was the one who took the lead on our Luke Skywalker deepfake video. I'm around enough and that I've been able to sort of ingest a lot of that knowledge. I've gone through the process of creating a deepfake, so I have that sort of experience, but I don't have the extended experience of doing it on many different shots. We did a previous deepfake before where Keanu Reeves basically saves a person
Stops
from
a robbery.
Yeah, at a little gas station. And I didn't work on that video at all. I was working on a different video at the time. And so I didn't really get that sort of hands-on experience with it. So I feel like I can't quite say that like I'm a deepfake expert without ever really doing deepfakes, but I feel like I'm around it enough. I understand it. I understand the sort of ideas behind them.
Throwing the ball back to Matt here. So, Matt, I think where you were going in that behind the scenes director's cut, they reference what these guys did, right?
I don't think they did explicitly.
No, not directly.
But it was so obvious to me that the pressure they were feeling with this whole massive segment in the episode was from you and was from your video. There was sort of this anonymous or vague acknowledgement of like, well, some folks looked at this. But what impressed me was, if I recall it correctly, there was a humility to what they did, and they acknowledged there's room to grow on this.
I think that might be a little open to interpretation. I think ILM and Disney and LucasArts, they don't want to acknowledge us. We've been trying to get some ILM VFX artists on our show for well over a year now, and it's been just very difficult to get a hold of ILM PR. But that video was very interesting because I had straight up said on Twitter a year ago that I was confident it is not a deepfake. And then when we got back after Christmas break in January, we did a VFX Artist React episode to The Mandalorian, and we looked at the thing, and I was surprised that the other two guys were both like, oh yeah, this is probably a deepfake. It looks like a deepfake to me. And Nico was the one who was certain that it looked more like a deepfake. And I was like, man, I didn't think it was. But you're the expert on this. I'm going to trust your opinion. Fast forward a few months, several months actually, it was way later, when their video finally came out breaking down what they did for Luke Skywalker's face. And I felt a little vindicated because it was kind of not a deepfake. Basically, what I was able to discern was that they had put in a huge amount of effort trying to do a deepfake, and they did all of this stuff, and at the end of the day, they still augmented what they got so much that it was basically just a complete CGI recreation anyway. I find that to be kind of interesting. It's like they gave it a shot, they weren't pleased with the results, and so they fell back on what they were familiar with. And you know what? Huge props to them for doing any of this to begin with, because I think they're taking those experiences, they're learning from them, and they're going to double down on making sure their deepfakes are working next time around. Because there's literally just like a dozen, maybe a couple dozen deepfake experts in the world when they're working on this, and they've got just a matter of maybe a few months maybe, to do all the effects for the entire episode. There's a lot of pressure, and you have to deliver for something like this. And so I think maybe they kind of got nervous that the deepfakes weren't really working, and they didn't really have any experts who knew how to do it.
So I have a question before we get into the meat of the conversation that I think Matt's going to take it in a certain direction. I'm not
before.
sure. We'll see. Yeah. Well, here's a question I have for you from an engineering perspective. Like, I understand that we're wrapping a face on a face and we're using computers to do that, and that's video. I understand that. What you can't see is I'm sitting here at my desk, and I like to mess with photography while we talk, and I've got old film. This is a glass plate negative. It's a photo.
No way.
Taken on a glass plate. Yeah, it's a thing. I like to collect these.
That's
and
cool.
so there's something about making a photo without taking the photo. So Photoshop, changed everything. But there's something to making a photo look real, or we'll say making an image look real. And then you have to take that one step further to make a video look real. And then there's all kinds of other implications that Matt's brought to my attention about faking audio and like faking someone's voice. So here's a question. I follow you on Twitter at Sir Render with a W, SIRWRENDER. And you often post these little animation clips that you do. And I know you have a mechanical engineering background. I know you're very, very good with CAD. You're very good with Blender. It's clear you've been working with Blender and things of that nature. You are working with Blender, correct?
Technically Cinema 4D, but they're the same program.
Okay, got it. So you're starting to post things that the only way I can tell that they're not real is your fake camera zooms. Like you're putting in like really quick camera zooms and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, well, I know cameras can't do that. However, the lighting, the textures, everything you're adding in, you don't put lens flare in there. You're gonna, you could, but you don't. All these little things that you're adding in there, even the background bokeh, you're controlling it. So my question before Matt takes us in a different direction is, from an engineering perspective, how do you create something that looks photorealistic? And then how does that extrapolate out towards video? So the first question is, using your engineering brain, describe what makes an image look photorealistic, and then take me to the next level and turn that single image into a moving image.
Oh gosh, that's a deep question. I think it's not too hard to make an image look photoreal because you can hack things together. Like for photoshopping, for instance, you could literally take a real image of someone's face and Photoshop it onto another person's face, and it looks pretty real because the source is all real. But the moment it becomes video, now you're having to deal with all the subtle ways something moves between, 30 times a second.
I'm not talking about people. I'm looking at a rendering you did here of those little rubber poppers we had as a kid.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, is this real or is this fake? I don't know, genuinely.
It was fake.
Okay, so you created this out of nothing.
I'm showing a video real quick of another one of those things. Yeah, and so I spent a lot of time creating the materials for those little poppers to get like the way light interacts with that dialed in just right.
That's the transmissivity. So that's like the diffuse versus the spectral reflection of light. Like those are two different. Spectral reflection is a mirror. Diffuse reflection is like the surface has a bunch of little jagged spots on it, and so the light doesn't completely reflect clearly.
Oh man, that's
right?
almost more technical than I'm prepared to answer.
But you're doing all this. You maybe just have different words.
Sure. Yeah. So first off, technology is amazing. Render engines have gotten so good that you can literally just like turn it on and it looks great. Like it's very easy. I use Octane Render. It's a path tracing render engine. So path tracing being like, oh gosh, man, we can get deep on all this. Path tracing is kind of like ray tracing. You have these points of light that are simulating how light works. It hits a surface, bounces off geometrically, and then hits another surface, bounces off, and eventually makes its way to your eyeball. And along the way, it picks up it loses energy in various ways, whether it's losing some frequencies causing it to be a different color. It's probably losing some actual energy by bouncing off things, so it's becoming a little bit more dim. And different surfaces have different properties that will absorb or reflect that energy differently. And so much about rendering comes down to the materials. It's not about the actual light. So it's all in the materials. And this has taken me so many years to kind of wrap my head around, because you have materials that are reflective, you have materials that are diffuse. They are not very reflective. You have materials that are reflective, but they're very rough. Think of that in terms of like a Christmas ornament. You got that really shiny, glossy red orb, but then you've also got the shiny, sort of matted red orb, right? They both have the same amount of reflectivity, but one has a very rough surface. So when the light hits it, it's bouncing all different areas as opposed to where it geometrically should be going. And so that kind of creates a different look. And then you also have certain amounts of transmission. So the light ray will hit an object and it'll actually penetrate it a little bit. Maybe it penetrates it, a little bit into the surface. Maybe it penetrates halfway through it. Maybe it goes clean through, like with glass. You'd be surprised how many surfaces actually will absorb that light, like it'll penetrate it a little bit. Skin is probably the best example of it. If you've ever taken a flashlight and like shown it through your thumb or something like that, your thumb actually glows red a little bit. And that's because light is penetrating into your thumb and then exiting the color of what's inside your thumb, which is, a lot of blood, redness. Yeah, exactly. And it's all very complicated. And it's taken decades for render engines to get to a point where they can just provide the tools for artists to choose what materials they want to replicate. And so for photorealism, light is obviously very important, but it really comes down to the materials. Because now you're trying to replicate real world things that we're all familiar with. And so if you compare, say, a wood table to, pavement, two very different materials, and they could be rough, they could be reflective, depending on a lot of different factors. And so you have to specifically choose what those settings are going to be for that material. Now, fortunately, in this day and age, there's a lot of sort of, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, presets. They're not quite presets, but there's like material libraries that you can pull from. Like someone's already put in the work for figuring out what concrete or pavement should look like. And primarily what it usually comes down to is the image, the diffuse texture, as we call it, the albedo. And this is the color information, the pattern on the concrete. You got the black and then the yellow strips in the middle, right?
And you can like take pills to help keep that albedo at a certain level as you age.
I mean, and sometimes the pavement doesn't look like pavement. It's okay. It happens to the best of us.
But hardly ever.
So yeah, it's very complex, and it's hard to create something photorealistic because there are so many settings that you have to dial in. And, you can literally have like, say, 24 different settings, and just through the laws of how, it's a statistics? I don't know. Like, what do you call it? Like the number of permutations you can have from a small number of numbers, right? It's a lot. I forget the mathematical naming for this type of idea, but literally just like a couple dozen settings can recreate everything you see.
A lot of permutations. Like it just
exactly
said.
Yeah. And it can change it from looking like shiny metal to fur, everything in between, just by adjusting these settings here. And so photorealism comes down to being able to get those settings correct for the materials, not the lighting. The lighting has their own settings as well, such as the intensity, the sort of fall off you have, but that's where the render engines come in, and they kind of take care of a lot of that stuff for you. Back in the day when I first started learning how to do CG rendering, I was using a program called Mental Ray, or the standard renderer, and these were not unbiased renderers. They were very biased, and that's a whole other definition. These days we use unbiased rendering. It's trying to simulate reality. You don't really have any control over what it does. It's like it's either on or off, and you get ray tracing, and it just works. Back in the day, you had to turn on certain things like global illumination, the number of rays that you would have to sort of bounce, right? And you could change those settings to get a more realistic result. And that was super hard because now, on top of the couple dozen settings you have for materials, you've got a couple dozen different settings for the world and the sort of laws that your world behaves by. Like, the world doesn't behave without global illumination. Light comes from everywhere, bouncing off of the walls, off of the sky, and without global illumination, it looks unreal. It doesn't look real at all. Probably my favorite example of that type of thing is the color of a shadow. If you're outside and you look at a shadow from you, what's the color of that shadow? Most people would say, like, isn't it kind of like a dark gray type thing? Well, if you're outside on a sunny day, that shadow is blue. It's a blue colored shadow. And that's because a shadow is the absence of light. And when you're outside, what that really means, it's the absence of the primary source of light. So the sun is a very white, perhaps slightly yellow color. And everything around you or the shadow is lit by that, and so therefore it's colored by that. But the shadow, there is no sunlight there, so it's having to be lit by everything else. What is the second largest light source outside of the sun?
Just the atmosphere, yeah.
The blue sky.
Yeah. I had a really weird thought one time when I was outside peeing on the side of a building.
Classic. Love
I was
it.
like yeah. And so I noticed, I was looking at the shadow of my stream of urine and I noticed it wasn't there. I noticed that the shadow wasn't there. I mean, there were other shadows there, very tiny shadows, but there was not a shadow of the stream of urine. And I was like, that's weird. And I was like sitting there peeing and I was doing the math and I was like thinking about the angle of the sun relative to me. I was like, oh, if I move closer to the wall, then there's going to be a shadow. And so I moved closer to the wall and the shadow appeared. And I was like, why does the distance of the stream from the wall affect the shadow? And it was a little bit of documentation research later that I understood the concept of an umbral shadow. Have you heard of this?
Umbral. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that specific term.
So an umbral shadow is like the fuzziness of a shadow is a function of the width of the light source and the distance between you and where you're casting the shadow.
Totally.
That's why shadow puppets work with your hand at a certain distance, and they work best with a point light source.
Yeah.
But if you had a light box, then you would get a really soft shadow on your your little hand dog thing.
Absolutely.
Right?
I love this.
So I realized, the shadow matters because of geometry, and it's the width of the light source. And that's why, like right now, there's across the room here, there's an LED light source, and it's got a bunch of little LEDs in it. And if you could, at a certain distance, you could actually count the number of LEDs in the light source by the number of shadows it casts.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No,
Matt, I'm derailing this.
That's an amazing observation because you're totally right. If you think of a giant softbox as being a matrix of point lights, that's essentially what it is. But if you have a very nice diffuse filter over it, the resolution of those point lights becomes greater. You end up with so many different points that they all kind of just blend into one large diffuse lighting shape. But you can still kind of break it down. At one end of the softbox, you're looking at your subject and the rays are going outwards like this, right? And on the other side of the light box, it's doing the same thing, but from a different starting point. And so if you just take either end of that softbox and just like say it's 2 point lights, they're going to create a double shadow around your subject here.
Yeah, but behind me I've got this bookshelf and I have 2 lights, one on each side of the room. And so I've got 2 shadows here, and I'm constantly trying to figure out how to get rid of this shadow in the middle.
So you just need more lights just to make one long strip of lights around it.
I need more global lighting. You're teaching me things, Ren.
So that sort of like example there where you got the double shadow thing going on, that's in essence the sort of bounds of your shadow. But then you have all the lights in between that are going to start incrementally moving that shadow inwards until it's just a single point from the center. And that's where the core of the light is. It's where most of the light is going to be shared from. And so that's where the strongest shadow is going to be. And as it goes out to the side, where you have fewer of those points kind of pointing at that spot, the shadow is going to be dimmer. And it creates this sort of illusion where the shadow becomes fuzzy and more sort of like blurred out. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to cut myself off here because I could talk to you about this stuff forever. But I think where Matt, at least in our conversations about preparing for this, Matt had some really interesting points. And, okay, so we're just going to assume that is an endless well that you and I could go down together, but we're going to stop it. Matt, I'm really interested to hear the things that you were interested in talking about. Hey, let's peel back a little bit of the curtain here. I think that'll be fun. Okay, so let me kind of explain who this sponsor spot is for. I've got it right here. Hold on, Matt. Let me say something here.
Okay. This episode of No Dumb Questions is brought to you by HelloFresh.
I have control of your
It makes
voice.
me feel uncomfortable.
I have control of your voice on an episode where we're talking about deepfakes. How do you feel about that?
That's so weird.
I know. Hey, guess what?
What?
If you've been listening for a while, you know the deal with HelloFresh. They make pre-measured ingredients, the meal kit delivery service. It's all measured the right way. It's delicious. It's awesome. It shows up at your door. You don't have to go to the grocery store.
Yeah. How'd that feel, Matt? Just to hear your voice.
Every word of that is dripping with integrity and accuracy. I have no problem with it. I'm not uncomfortable at all. I'm fine.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not fine.
You're not fine? It's just a little weird?
It's a little weird. How can that be weird? What are you doing to me? Are you messing with it? Are you making it sound different?
No, it's just you.
Did you slow me down 20% there?
No, it's just you. I just got the file from when we recorded last time, and I just pulled up your voice to play it for you, and I just assumed it felt weird. So there you go.
It did feel weird. Yet everything that I said, I stand by.
Yeah, this episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. It's a meal kit delivery service, and we love them. They send meals directly to your house. All the things that Matt said there when I was controlling his voice, they are true. And I'm delighted by the concept of delicious meals coming to my house, and I get to cook them with the family, and we get to eat cool stuff.
I'm increasingly delighted as I get into a little colder time of the year, and as the world is a little bit weirder, I'm increasingly delighted at the opportunity to just stay home and have my food show up there. And then we just do all of the things together, because we are in a very magical time as a family, a time that I think years from now we will all look back on and be willing to trade a lot to relive even one night of cooking and eating together to just enjoy. This is the golden time for us, and doing food this way when we're able to do it, it contributes to that.
Dude, why are you going to raise the nostalgia flag and make me realize that cooking with my family in the kitchen is a privilege that is going to change? Why would you do that to me?
Truth? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like we try to be honest with each other and say the things that we think. I thought that's what we were doing.
That is what
now
we're
I feel
doing.
Terrible. I'm so sorry for whatever just happened to your heart. But it's true, dude. And I'm thinking in those categories more all the time. Like the math equation I'm running on time and money and people and relationships is more and more going through this funnel of realization that there's not like a next time that I'm super excited about. This is the time I've been looking forward to as a man, as a husband, as a dad. It's beautiful right now, and not getting it back. And stuff like this contributes to it in a really positive way. So I'm grateful for it, and I like it when we get to do it.
Back out.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Back
I'm
out.
sorry
All
for
the way
everything.
back. All the way back. And talking points.
Right?
What's our offer? Yeah. What is it?
Looks like the offer is that you can go to HelloFresh.com/NDQ14, and then you use the code NDQ14, and you get up to 14 free meals and 3 free gifts.
Gifts?
That's what it says, is you get 3 free gifts.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I haven't signed up for this one. I've been a customer for a while, so I haven't tried the 3 free gifts, but I'm intrigued. It bothers me that I don't have the gifts yet.
Do you get the gifts, or do you get to give the gifts? I gotta know.
I think you get the gifts. That is what the language indicates to me.
That's amazing.
So as if getting a stunningly large amount of food wasn't enough, also gifts. I really like HelloFresh, man. They understand this internet thing.
They just
get how
mystery
people's brains
boxed
are
it.
wired.
Yeah.
Well, it is a mystery box.
Okay. All right. I see you, HelloFresh, up in your game. That works. So, I mean, that's it. That's the offer. So if you like these kinds of things, you can go to, what is it, Matt?
It's HelloFresh.com/NDQ14, and then you use the promo code NDQ14 at checkout.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for supporting the podcast by supporting the sponsors. It's a big deal, and sorry we got on the nostalgia bus for a second there. Or maybe I'm not. Who knows? Who can know?
Yeah, I'm not emotionally clear on whether I'm sorry about that or not. All I am clear on is that the relationship angle on HelloFresh is more important to me now than it has ever been. And so that's just the truth of the matter. That's what it conjures for me right now.
Most of my interneting is educational Bible stuff, but I try to very intentionally frame it for people who think there's a deity behind the Bible and people who don't.
Okay.
And one way or another, it's a very influential document. I mean, the most influential document in the history of history.
Oh, easy, yeah.
Is that particular document. It's the best-selling book of all time.
Right.
And people make a lot of different things of it. And what I find as I get feedback on that is that people feel pretty intimidated by it. They feel like this is something for experts or zealots, people who hold very passionate opinions. It's from a very foreign culture at a very distant time. And it feels like at best it's this entirely subjective thing where really people are just going to do whatever they want to do with it and then throw the force of God behind their opinion, and it's going to get weird. And that can't happen for sure. But one of the things that we figure out as we start working on it together is that even though there is a ton of technical stuff there, history, language, culture, narratives, genres we're familiar with, genres that might be lost to history that we're trying to cobble back together.
Etymology and stuff like that,
Yeah, like, what do you do with Jonah? Is that a literal history story about a thing that happened? Well, I mean, it could be. The story holds itself out as involving the maker of all things. So I guess somebody could get swallowed by a fish and live in there and barf backed up if such a, or maybe it's some kind of metaphor. The point is, there are just all these little moving parts that you don't think about until you start getting into the world of it.
Yeah.
And likewise, I, as just some idiot, sit with my family, I eat some Bunch Crunch, and a little popcorn, whatever, and I'm like, hey, it's freaking Luke Skywalker, like from when I was a baby. Look at him, there he is, right there. Like Star Wars has danced around this forever. Everybody else is always on the Star Wars stuff and in Clone Wars and everything else, but never Luke. Like Luke's the rock star. He's the holy grail, the untouchable thing.
I was literally about to say he's the holy grail of nostalgia for Star Wars.
Yes. The holy grail of nostalgia for everything, for anybody under 55 or 60 years old right now. Like, that's the guy, the character. Mm-hmm. And they've been so hesitant to put him in front of us that, for me, I'm not sitting there thinking about the technology very much. Passing thoughts like, I really want this to work. But mostly it was pretty easy for me to just go with it and be like, hey, this is great.
Good. They did their job. Suspension of disbelief.
Right. And so for me, I don't get everything that's going on behind that. That's not my job. That's very intimidating to me because I'm not trained in this. This isn't what I do. Much like when people come to an ancient Near Eastern document that they don't know the languages, they don't know the history, it's an intimidating thing. But what I find is if you really sit down and you start working on the actual raw materials, not the religious conclusions, just the raw materials of the document with somebody, what you figure out pretty quickly is if you just kind of encourage them on, like, yeah, but what do you see in the conversations you have? Right, but what about all the stories you've read? Like, well, what would you do or think if you were confronted with such a situation or somebody came at you with these kind of words like what we're seeing in the text and in the story? Pretty quickly, people start to fall back on their own intuitive, organic learning. They've gathered all this data over the course of their lives socially, and they know what kind of looks right, and they know what kind of doesn't look right socially, and they can imagine even cross-culturally, cross-linguistically, how people would probably behave because of how humans are, because they are great interpreters, very well practiced interpreters, even if they don't know it.
We all have a lot of experience with people.
And so there's just kind of this thing where something passes the smell test or it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And so listening to you two guys talk, I'm sitting here going like, I didn't know the term for whatever that pea shadow is, but yeah, I've peed on stuff before. Yeah, it's true. That shadow does work that way. That's kind of crazy.
And the shadow gets more intense the closer to the end rather than far away.
And I'm a very close peer, so for me, that's a very, very intense shadow. I've got powerful hips, so I can get right in there. The thing about it is, though, like everything you guys are describing, when I hang around with Destin, just gradually words get ascribed to phenomena I've observed my whole life. I just didn't know there was a word for it. And so you learn that, I'm like, oh, well, I can't hang with you. I don't know that stuff, but I can at least learn the language and kind of get it. And oh, great. So you're working in this field where people are probably the most experienced interpreters of anything they're good interpreters of. I would argue that your average human, the best thing, the most experienced thing they are in terms of interpretation is at the human face and the human body. It's so ingrained into us. We can see faces in a toaster. We can see faces in a cloud. If we see just the hint of a reflection of somebody in the room who's trying to spook us, we might not know they're there, but we feel like somebody's there because subconsciously we see face, we see humanity, it's like us, we see ourselves in others, which means that if something's wrong, that is going to drive us freaking crazy in ways we can't articulate. But if something passes our interpretive test, that could trick us into believing something is real that absolutely is not. When I watch your stuff, when I listen to you and Destin talk right now, that to me is that fascinating place. It's all very interesting. It's all very technical. That's great. But doesn't it really come down to how it affects the people who put eyes on it? And if it's gross and a failure, it's because it doesn't pass their interpretive smell test that they've built over the course of a lifetime of learning.
100%.
And if it does pass the smell test, you're some sort of modern sub-deity or demigod
Sorcerer.
that could go out and change reality to make things whatever reality needs to be to suit the purposes of whoever writes the check. And so the stakes are, it's amazing how thin that line is between that sucked, these people are terrible, I don't believe that's Luke Skywalker for 1 second, and the line between that and like, whoa, did Keanu Reeves actually break up that robbery? He's even better than I thought.
Did Canada just declare war on Finland?
Or that. Ooh.
We've seen less of that than I would have expected by now. The barrier of entry is still a little too high.
Question number 1. To what degree do conversations about ethics come up? Not that I have any charges or accusations. I just think the whole thing's fascinating and interesting. But I mean, to what degree do the conversations about ethics come up in effects circles? Like, what do we think about using a dead actor? What do we think about youthifying somebody? What do we think about just, haha, it'd be fun if this were Will Ferrell doing this instead of Jimmy Kimmel? Does it come up?
I mean, it does come up. Like, we definitely had conversations about the ethical nature of us using Keanu Reeves' likeness, I guess, in a video for ourselves. And I'm not exactly sure where I sit on that sort of like moral line, right? I'm not exactly sure we crossed the line there. I think we tried to make sure that it was parody enough and ridiculous enough that everyone just understands that this is not actually Keanu Reeves. And same thing with we did a deep fake Tom Cruise back in the day, and this was way earlier in the tech, so that was a little bit easier even to be able to get away with because no one was really fooled. It looked great.
It was
but
good.
It
was good.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, like, it looked good in my opinion, but I don't know. For me, it was just like, the moment I see it, I instantly knew, like, okay, this isn't real, but it's cool that we made this, you know? And like you're saying about how we are very good at recognizing faces, I think that's an extreme understatement. I believe that our brains recognizing faces and just understanding them and identifying them is the most advanced algorithm our brain has. And so, you know, when you're trying to fool that, you have to have an incredibly advanced sort of result to fool that algorithm. It's one thing to make some little rubber popper toys and rubber and asphalt and glass and whatever else look real, because now we're having to just draw upon our personal experiences interacting with those things in our lives. If we don't have much experience interacting with a certain type of material, we don't actually know what it should look like. And that's just for those things. With faces and whatnot, it's like, not only are you drawing on your own personal sort of experiences, you're drawing upon the evolutionary experiences of our brains understanding that faces are important and therefore put more experience points in that area. We're only just now at a point where we're starting to be able to replicate that and be able to fool those advanced brain algorithms. And so in terms of the ethical nature of things, right now it's still early enough that the barrier to entry is high, that the only people who can do that sort of thing are ethical people. Ish. Like, I mean,
Ish.
I think everyone is perhaps slightly unethical to a degree, but you have these situations where the only people who know how to really do this are doing it for themselves, for fun,
they're doing it in the light.
Yeah, and there have been situations where deepfakes literally came about for replicating like female people in certain types of videos, and
Right.
That's very unethical. That's not okay. And yet that was what they were used for quite a bit. And my fear, I remember having a big fear. What's going to happen when someone's able to recreate some sort of politician or celebrity doing something in a seemingly natural environment and situation, and then they make the video, it looks pretty real, they put it up on Twitter, it goes viral, and everyone now just believes that this is fact. And I think that is going to be a problem, but it's not really been too big of a problem yet, at least in terms of...
Well, you could crash a stock market. You could start a war. You could activate sleeper cells with that kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, but like...
I mean, think about how influential... Elon Musk mutters something about how he feels about Bitcoin on a given day.
And then the world changes overnight.
It affects gajillions of USD in Bitcoin value. I mean, if you wanted to be malicious with that and you had the power to use other people as a puppet, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of potential for evil.
So here's a question. What about, how about apply that same sort of thinking and arguments for photos? Because Photoshop has been around for almost 3 decades at this point, over 3 decades. People have been recreating politicians and celebrities in, not flattering situations for decades. And yet,
I saw some of those this week.
And yet, we've not really seen too much really bad fallout come out from that.
What's interesting, Laura Arricchio wrote a book about Marquis de Lafayette, and she talked about the rags or the old newspapers. There were a lot of things like what you're talking about drawn in caricature form. And so it's been happening forever. Mm-hmm. Like people draw their enemies in compromising situations. And so the question is, now you can do it for real. I'm doing air quotes around real. Or let's put it this way. You can do it in such a way that it gets past this face recognition algorithm in the human mind that you're describing. Does that algorithm have a name, by the way?
I have no idea.
Facing. But now we can do it. Now we can do it in such a way that you can get past that algorithm. And so we've crossed a line, I think, in what Matt's talking about. Like it was cool and funny and haha, but I think I think in your mind right now you have the ability to do it.
I mean, with enough effort, you can very much so recreate a person at this point. And it's just going to get easier and easier as every year goes by, and the tools become simpler and more freely available. We're not quite at that point yet, and so I am slightly concerned about where that will go. Like, what happens when the tools become so easy that the people who shouldn't be doing this sort of thing get their hands on it? That question has yet to be answered. But the flip side to this is that fortunately, all of this stuff has a trail. There are artifacts that come out, and these artifacts for a very long time came down to our sort of brain algorithm test. Does it seem real? Does it seem fake? And when it is better than that, you have to fall onto these other things. The great thing about deep fakes is that they're made by AI. The great thing about AI is that they can see other AI. And so there are these other tools being developed specifically designed to be able to trace and track whether or not an image has been digitally manipulated. Is this the...
You're talking about a GAN, what is that called? A general adversarial network?
Yeah.
I'm mixing two ideas.
I think a deepfake kind of is a GAN. I'm pretty sure it's like... It's all the same thing. It's literally like an anti-deepfake, essentially. It's kind of figuring out what...
Generative adversarial network. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And again, I am by no means a machine learning expert. I am a machine learning interested party. Not even an amateur enthusiast. But there are people creating tools specifically designed to be able to tell whether or not an image has been photoshopped. And now we're getting to a point where we can tell whether or not a deepfake has been applied. And it's looking at a whole bunch of different things, because in an image, you have millions of pixels. That's just like the raw idea of a picture, right? But really, you have a file format that is displaying those pixels, and those formats obey certain laws for how they compress images and the sort of ways they kind of save space. And so like an MP4, a JPEG, those types of files are very compressed. They lose a lot of data. And that's how you're able to get like some crazy high-res image without much file size. If you were ever to look at like the raw, high-quality, lossless versions of those same files, hundreds of times bigger. And so when you compress stuff like that, you end up with a bit of a paper trail. You have like these blocky artifacts. And when you Photoshop something from one of those things to begin with, you are now moving those artifacts in ways that couldn't have possibly been generated when that file was originally created. And most sort of deepfakes today are being created from content that other people made. And so the universal format are these low bit rate sort of files. You know, you're able to get a file of a politician doing something fairly natural. Maybe you ripped it off of YouTube. Maybe you recorded it off your TV or something like that. Maybe you found it in an image. I don't know. It doesn't matter what you did. Chances are it was one of those low quality 8-bit files that you are now manipulating, and it's going to leave a trail. That still opens the possibility up for getting the lossless versions of whatever and trying to circumvent the sort of, is this real from a file perspective? Because I've given that thought before. I was in a car accident years ago where I was rear-ended, and I took a video of the whole situation. You know, you're supposed to document it all, but it was
Sure.
late at night. It was on the highway. You couldn't really see anything, so I took it into my editing program, and I just boosted the exposure. I brightened everything up so that you could see the details of the shot. And so when I submitted that to insurance because it was a bit of a pileup, several cars had rear-ended each other. I was not at fault at any point. I will put that out there. That was the point of me taking the video. But I definitely had the thought of, is this going to stand up in court? I have augmented this. I have manipulated this. This is no longer the ground truth of what we saw. I have the original video. It wasn't a problem for me because if it ever became an issue, I could just submit it. But, you know, there's a lot of different sort of ways that you got to like forensically determine whether or not a video file is real.
So here's my question. At what point does the ability to manipulate video and change what appears to be a thing a person is saying, at what point do we cross a threshold where, yeah, cool, Ren said there's this artifact thing. Well, I'm a nation state with like gobs of money. I can make a program that will go and scrub all the artifacts out and make it look even real. I can realify it, so to speak. So at what point does video evidence no longer stand up in court?
Yeah.
Because we've blurred the line so much. It's like that umbral shadow. There's so many sources that are, it beyond a reasonable doubt. We've injected enough doubt into the system where we know that it could be a failure.
Yeah.
Like, is there a way to, like, do we make special cameras that somehow tie a bow on each individual image and verify that it's true? Like, is there, how do we do these things?
I forget what it was, but there was this app that took video and was able to record metadata into the video to guarantee that this is the original unmodified thing through whatever sort of technology they're using.
Like you could add up the numbers of all the color values of all the pixels and come up with a checksum or something that, or the histogram.
Yeah, it was meant for journalists in say like Africa or the Middle East where there's unrest and whatnot, and they're trying to get the word out there, and that like their phone gets taken by whoever, and them trying to say that, oh, this video is fake. The biggest problem through all of this right now isn't technological, it's psychological. That's the largest problem. It's one thing to be able to prove logically and tangibly that something is real or fake, but convincing people to change how they feel is a completely different battle. From a technical standpoint, there's always going to be a bit of a fight between the hackers and the defenders, right? We see this with any sort of platform. There's always, you get this hacker that figures out some sort of way to get through the system, and then you have the people who are supposed to protect the system fight back and build up better defenses, and now the security is better, and that hacker can't quite get in anymore until they make another leap in their abilities or technology or whatever, and they're able to hack better now. So then now the people defending are having to make better security. It's a constant back and forth between making something that is secure and something that is not, because there are people trying to break it. And I think that same type of thinking and methodology, I think, will also apply to video. As better video tools become a thing, better video security tools will become a thing. But it's all happening at such a high level now, where this, I think, is where this conversation was going. It's like all of that stuff is happening at a level now that it's all just beyond us. It's all happening on the back end of things, and that we can't see any sort of difference. The diminishing returns from the sort of differences are so high level that we kind of just don't care, and it becomes more of a psychological issue. So it's hard to say. It's will the courts be able to hold up and trust certain evidence? Will that evidence be defended well enough if something is fake? I mean, it's always been an issue, and I think it's going to continue to be an issue.
It feels like this is one of those places where that Brandolini's BS asymmetry principle applies yet again, in terms of, we talk about it in terms of misinformation and overcoming misinformation. It takes an order of magnitude more energy to overcome misinformation than to create misinformation.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
BS. But you referenced something, Ren, that I think I found it to be true. I find it to be true in myself, and I don't like this. And that is that belief is overwhelmingly an emotional decision.
Yeah.
What we think is true often leads with the emotions, and then the justification comes afterwards. And then the justification becomes partially calcified when we articulate it to other people, and fully calcified when we shed blood over this thing, whether it be metaphorically or literally.
Sure, yeah, okay.
If I burn relationships to defend a thing that I logically articulated because I emotionally felt it earlier on, like now I'm married to it. This thing that I feel and that I believed and I articulated and argued for was apparently more valuable to me than that relationship.
Yeah.
And so once that blood is shed, wow, you're committed. So all you would have to do, understanding how the human brain works, understanding how my brain works, is some sort of visual misrepresentation meant to evoke an emotion or a response in me. It doesn't need to be that good for that long. It doesn't need to look valid for very long. Only a day or two, and it could trigger my self-righteousness trigger. It could get me worked up, amped up. It could send me to the keyboard to tell all the people how the things are, how things ought to be. And now I'm already out there, and I shed blood, and I lost followers, and I unfollowed some people, and I blocked some people, and I doubled down, and I used some pejoratives to describe how wrong and bad other people are who didn't look at this video evidence and come to the conclusions I did. This furthers my narrative.
Enter the sunk cost fallacy at this point.
Sunk cost fallacy,
Enter the sunk cost fallacy as well, yeah. And so then I go and do that, and then 3 days later, we run that checksum, and sure enough, that image was taken from, it was held out as being taken from a reliable app, a reliable source. It turns out it wasn't. I got manipulated. There's egg on my face, but now I've burned down my relationship with my dad.
Oof. This is all hypothetical.
What am I going to do?
I assume.
It is hypothetical. It is hypothetical because I have not burned down my relationship with my dad, even when we disagree. It's pretty good between us.
I've seen it. I've seen this happen though in real life, Matt, with people, and they saw a thing on Facebook, and then they got really angry, and so it's hypothetical for you, but not for others.
I've seen this thing with me. I just haven't burned down a relationship with my dad yet. Is the point.
Good.
And so all of this to say, there was a famous political incident, and I don't want to push anybody's buttons, so I won't be specific with it, but it was with an election that happened pre-2016, so it wasn't that one, everybody.
Okay.
But there was a situation where a prominent member of one party unapologetically said and proliferated a thing that was definitely not true about the rival party's presidential candidate. It was pretty evidently not true. I didn't like the candidate who was being criticized, but still, it was pretty evidently not true. The election came and went. Nobody really wanted to debunk the thing that had been said. And then the politician who had used mistruths to undermine his opponent just went on a national television show and was like, no, unapologetically that wasn't true. But that person was so wrong, it accomplished what it needed to.
Whoa.
And so that was the moral justification. And it was very difficult. It would have been so much more efficient for me to just tell that story with names.
No, I got you, though.
People are smart. They can Google. And
because it doesn't matter.
And the reason I didn't is because the point of the story isn't look how dumb or bad that group is or that group is. I don't like political parties, so I think they're all dumb.
I hear you.
But the point is, the lie only has to hold up for a little while, long enough to get people sent into motion, spun up emotionally, and long enough to get them to go out and verbally plant that flag. And then when people push back on the flag planting, long enough to metaphorically or even, God forbid, literally shed blood. And now it's on. It doesn't matter if it was true or not, because it doesn't matter about what the original file was. Now I know who you are.
Yeah.
And so that for me is the recipe that I see for how even slipshod work could be so easily weaponized against my frail humanity, my frail insecurities, to get me to do things to people that I might not otherwise do, because image is powerful and narrative is powerful.
Absolutely.
And it's not your job to solve that, Ren. It's just really fun to game it out.
No, I
with
know,
you.
for sure. I mean, isn't that like the main problem with social media and particularly Facebook today? Because they don't have any sort of tools combating any of that. I mean, Dustin, I know you've been making videos surrounding misinformation and stuff like that. So I have an example of something that is far less malicious, but nonetheless in the same realm, because we managed to fool a whole ton of people with the video that we put out, and people just took it as truth. I'm going to tell that story. 2 years ago, we made a video called Bosstown Dynamics. And basically, it's a parody of Boston Dynamics, who makes state-of-the-art robotics, and they've been getting better and better over the years. The robotics are now like bipedal. They're walking around. They're doing things. And the scientists, because they are trying to test the limits of what they've made, are, interfering with the robots and trying to do what they do. And we just thought it was so funny, because it's like this robot's just trying to walk through a door and you're kicking him. Like, because we're, what's the word for like humanizing some sort of non-human thing? We do that to these robots and we feel bad for them. It's an emotional response to what these scientists are just like, oh, I'm just testing data. Like, what's the big deal? And so we made a whole video where we created a CGI robot that looked pretty realistic, and we go through all these motions of us testing it, but it's all just so ridiculous. We're whipping them with a whip, shooting it with a gun, like blowing an air horn around, hitting it with a chair like WWE, and the robot's just kind of like trying to do its job, which is just moving a box. And we thought it was a really funny video, a really funny idea.
It is.
Because it does... it's the perfect recipe for a funny little video. What we did not anticipate was the fact that people believed that it was not fake. Because what happened is we put it up on YouTube, and within a matter of hours, someone had ripped it from YouTube, cut out like the intro and the ending, subscribe push and all that stuff, and just uploaded that to Twitter. Now, granted, they had also downloaded... The act of ripping it from YouTube and re-uploading it compresses it like a couple times, and so you end up with a lower quality version, which helps hide a lot of the sort of visual artifacts that are tells for something that is fake. And so I was very proud of the work that we'd done. I thought it looked great, but I was never really fooled into thinking that it was real. So I never really sort of anticipated that people would be. And so when it went viral, it got like 25 million views in the first like couple days on Twitter. And our YouTube video did okay, but nowhere near that well. And we were having all kinds of celebrities retweeting it and saying how like robot abuse is bad. Everyone's going to look back on this, and this is going to be the reason why we're all doomed, is because we're treating the robots poorly and all this stuff. Like big name celebrities are tweeting this out. And
give me a couple.
Wiz Khalifa, Stephen Fry, Joe Rogan. Who else? Several big ones.
Wow.
No, not Stephen Fry.
Okay,
the more obnouschish British
Nope,
guy.
you already said it, and I already emotionally.
Yeah, he's already
it's done.
emotionally responded.
He is now.
I already tweeted Stephen Fry is an idiot, and I don't care what anybody says. And if you argue with me, we're not friends anymore.
You shed
So-
blood.
Piers Morgan?
Yeah, blood has been shed.
I think
That's
it was Piers
huge.
Morgan. Yeah, and that was like, wow, that was a response we didn't anticipate. And then when we sit and think about it and how people would consume it and see it, they're just scrolling through on Twitter. They see this video of this robot that looks real, and we're kicking them around. And it also looks like the robot they've seen before from Boston Dynamics. The aesthetic of the image is the same, even though it says Boss Town. not Boston. It says Bosstown right there. And yet, for some reason, no one reads that. They just see the image of the logo that looks like the Boston Dynamics logo, and they just assume it says that without ever actually looking at it. Because they're just scrolling through on Twitter of this 1 minute video. They maybe watch like 10 seconds. They're like, oh, wow, man, we're doomed. Retweet. And they just take it at face value, assume that it's real, move on with their lives, and that's a problem. So we saw this happen again with our second Bosstown Dynamics video. This time we were a little bit more prepared for it. And in hindsight, we probably shouldn't have made this video. Basically, we militarized the robot. The first time we made it, we actually got in contact with Boston Dynamics. They reached out and they loved the video. They thought it was really funny. They thought it was great. The second time around, they thought it was less funny. Because now we're actually starting to deal with real problems with thinking about the future of robotics. What happens when, it's Terminator. What happens when robots learn how to shoot a gun? We thought it was a funny idea, like, perfect aim, no matter what you throw at them. Yeah, perhaps we were a little short-sighted with this sort of moral impact a video like that could have. But again, same sort of thing happened. So many people thought it was real, and as a result, Boston Dynamics themselves started getting a huge amount of hate and death threats to the people who worked there.
Well, they could just deploy their robots to keep their employees safe.
Oh boy!
I saw a video.
They actually did this had real world flesh and blood consequences.
Exactly. And we were just having a laugh, as the Brits say. We thought it was a funny video. We furthered our own abilities. We made the robot more realistic. We added a whole bunch of other things like surface imperfections to kind of replicate the flawed nature of materials and surfaces and all that stuff. And we're just artists trying to create cool images. And so it's very easy to lose track of the sort of implications and consequences what we do can have. And that was probably the biggest thing for me in my career was like, oh, wow, something I worked on has now negatively impacted other people in reality, IRL. Granted, I don't think anyone ever actually faced any real danger. It's all just online warriors. It's all bark. There's no bite. But what about when it's not? What happens when it isn't just bark and you have some guy go out and is like, who actually believes that Boston Dynamics is going to ruin the world because they fundamentally believe they're evil and down the line they will create Skynet and it's going to doom us all. They're going to do everyone a favor by stopping that now.
Hello, faithful listener. If you're hearing this, it means that time has advanced in such a way that podcasting became a thing.
Yes.
My name is Jedediah Whitman, the great-grandfather of beloved podcast host and personality Matt Whitman, and I'm joined by
Jonathan Sandlin. I live mostly in Kentucky, and my understanding is that one of my distant, I don't know what you call the opposite of an ancestor, is going to create
descendants
a podcast with a friend of his named Matt Whitman. It's my understanding that they're going to have some struggles along the way. Is that correct, Jedediah?
Well, as you well understand, Jonathan Sandlin, from the American territory, unincorporated territory of Kentucky, is that right now, you and I can buy an 8-bedroom house on 45 acres for $1.75 in American money.
That's an incredible amount of money.
Now, as you know, 3 weeks ago, you and I were standing in your field, admiring the manure pile you had gathered for the spring fertilizer time, and men in a giant metal object appeared and walked forth, covered in steam and what looked like some sort of foil clothing.
Yes.
They told us things about the future and handed us this device to say we should speak into it to ask for help from future listeners to something that's called a podcast.
Yes.
So, though we don't have a lot of experience with such a device, we're doing our best to look forward and repeat what the men from the future told us to say as they revealed a vision about how things are going to turn out to be. And how things are going to turn out to be is that apparently $1.75 will no longer buy a home and hundreds of acres of land in the future, and that the only way to combat this is
Patreon. Patreon is what I understand my future great-great-great-great-great-grandson would like for you to consider as a way of supporting their metal spaceship faring, I don't know, society, whatever they're doing. I don't understand. I'm just a really good great-great-grandfather. So My understanding is if you go to patreon.com/nodumbquestions, which is a ridiculous name. I don't even know what a .com means. I don't know what a slash is.
Patreon?
I don't.
Sounds like someone misspelled patron.
I know. It reminds me of the Medici family. I've heard that they were patrons of the arts, but I don't know what a Patreon is.
It's almost as though the people of the future used up all the normal words and then had to cutify them to find new real estate in the intellectual space of the consumer. What will they come up with next? Shopley?
What I do know is that my great-great-great-great-grandson is probably someone that I'm proud of and does noble things for a living. Probably farming.
Blacksmithicon?
If you want to support on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/nodumbquestions. Thank you so much.
Patreon. Ridiculous.
Thank you for considering supporting at patreon.com/nodumbquestions. Let's go do another one in the back catalog.
Yeah, do that.
Let's do it.
Do that, please. Thank you.
I'm going to show you a video that I made that I took off YouTube.
That you took down?
I took down.
Oh, wow.
This is your pea shadow video?
No. Can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, so this is back.
wow.
This is
This
2011.
is a super old video. Wow.
Yeah, I know. So 38,000 views.
I love talking to a couple of mechanical engineers about super old. That's awesome.
So this is me and some buddies. This is a Phantom. This is one of the first times I had access to a Phantom, away from work.
Okay.
And I knew a very little bit about video editing, so I could do like some rudimentary stuff. This was back when video editing wasn't a thing. This is my buddy John Henry. Can you guys hear the audio?
I can, yeah.
I can, yeah.
So we're gonna try it. All right, so I'll just let you watch this, and I'll just let the third chair listen. John, can you shoot an apple off my head?
I can definitely shoot apple off your head. There's no question, man.
I think it's bull, so we're gonna try it.
Is this with the crossbow?
Yeah.
All right.
Crossbow, here we go.
Destin, you look exactly the same.
Double chin and all. So just like random shots.
This is the only time you're ever gonna see me hug a tree.
Oh my god, no way.
So just describe what you're seeing.
Oh my god. Oh, this is so scary. Okay, so I can say whatever I see here, like it's okay.
Yeah,
even
just
though this is a
describe
private
everything
video.
you're seeing. I'm not going to show this on the internet, but it's helpful to describe it.
So William Tell is this old story of this guy who was able to shoot an apple off of a person's head using a bow and arrow. So what I'm looking at right now is you with an apple on your head and a friend of yours with a crossbow aiming it at you, and what I'm assuming is an arrow locked and loaded in that crossbow.
It's a bolt, yeah.
All right.
It's
And here it goes.
2, 1, fire.
You did not! You have got to be kidding me, Destin Sandlin.
Oh
You
my god,
did
dude.
not.
Oh my Destin.
How?
Destin.
Are you seeing the video? All of this is fake. All of it's fake.
Okay.
You put it on the internet.
I did.
Oh my god.
In
I was
2011.
believing it was real.
Of course it's fake. You had kids in 2011.
I know.
Of course it's fake. My "you did not" is in reference to the fact that this saw the light of day on the internet.
This was when I was
38,000
learning how to
times.
edit. I was like, oh, YouTube's an interesting thing. Like Smarter Every Day wasn't Smarter Every Day at this point in time. This was me learning how to edit. And I had the same thought you did, Ren. I was like, oh, yeah, robots with guns. That sounds great. You know what would be funny is if we used a slow motion camera to film a crossbow bolt going into an apple above my head. So this was, I don't know that I've ever, other than running AI to up-res slow-mo, I don't edit slow-mo footage. But this right here was like the first time I was like, I have the ability to do that.
For science!
Destin,
so
this is flawless, dude. This is flawless video editing and effects here. It's simple. Like it's just some masking and layering of two different video clips. I'm assuming you're shooting this and then you move away and then the guy with the crossbow actually shoots the apple. and
Exactly.
you just stitch the two shots together. That's like one of the first things as an effects artist you can do.
It's it's VFX
It's
101.
effects 101. Absolutely.
And I
But
didn't know.
your execution is so flawless here. I believed this was real.
Are you
I was
serious?
like, Destin, are you serious? I can't believe you did this, because I didn't think logically. I was only reacting emotionally, because you sell this so well with your panic here, your sort of fear. Like, it's so believable. The moment you said it's fake, I was instantly like, first off, oh, thank God. Phew. Okay,
He's not
you're
an
not
idiot.
insane. You're not absolutely out of your mind. Good to know. Secondly, okay. I see how this can be done. I instantly see, and suddenly
I had forgotten about this until you were saying, "Oh yeah, I made the thing, and I wish I hadn't have made it." And then I was realizing, "Oh yeah, I did this because I didn't think about it because I was like, oh, I know I can. I shouldn't ask if I should. I should just do it." Matt, have you never? I've never showed this to you, Matt.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is. I cannot even tell you, Ren, how many conversations we have online, driving back and forth to home, whatever, just catching up with each other, or offline rather, talking about the state of the internet, what games people are playing, who's taking what angle, what's working, what's not. Like, we're always workshopping this stuff.
Yeah.
And one of our genres of conversation is the, oh no, not self-aware, didn't think that one through genre of conversation. And we have both observed several things that have happened on the internet, probably many times, where we just go, oh wow, didn't think through what that would do to planet Earth.
Yeah.
Or what that would do to self. And you never told me you had one of those.
Oh, look at this. Look how stupid I was. Do not attempt. All persons involved have special training.
Trying to sell it even further.
I even try to sell it even further. I'm a bad person.
The weirdest part about this whole thing is seeing a video on your YouTube channel with only 38,000 views.
Oh, no.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Congrats on 10 million, by the way.
Oh, whatever, man. It's just, we're not trying to win the internet. We're just having fun. But I think what's interesting about this is that I did not think about it, so I was not self-aware. It does fool people. It fooled you for a brief moment there. And
Absolutely.
To Matt's point, all it has to do is just motivate a person for a short period of time, and then they can go do something stupid. I'm ashamed to say, I did not think, hey, maybe some young person will try to replicate this. I did not have that thought. And it's just so completely dumb. I feel shame. But I mean, I don't know. It's just a weird thing. It's a weird thing. And so I think we're kind of coming up on this threshold with VFX where the abilities and the ramifications of using them are outpacing, how do I say this, the VFX artist's thoughts about the consequences. Do you think that's an accurate statement? Now, I'm not talking about you because you're a thoughtful individual, but I mean, in general, given enough money, there are people right now in developing nations that need the work, need money, that would be willing to do a thing for a drug lord in Mexico, for example. Or, you know, I think we're at a really interesting place where not enough people know to look for the artifacts you're talking about, and they don't know that they should probably suspend belief first and then be convinced that it's real. I don't know what I'm saying.
I mean, you're totally right in that it's so hard, you know, because it's so psychological, and we are emotional creatures first and foremost before logic. You know, it's the bigger part of our brain, and I think so anyway. And so when you start giving great power, you know, like the Spider-Man saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. You first got to identify that you have power, and I think most VFX artists don't acknowledge that, you know? They don't acknowledge that they can fool people and have real-world consequences from that. On top of, you know, just
tell
making those
such a gripping, unbelievable story that takes you to a person to a place of wonder. That in and of itself is power. Storytelling elements that nobody in the past has ever had.
For the positive.
For the positive, absolutely.
Gosh, I mean, what was the question there? It was about like the moral responsibility that VFX artists should think about.
There wasn't a question. It was just the realization that we're coming up on a strange moment in history where photos, slides, it was possible to fake them. I mean, the Soviets did a really good job of it during World War II, actually editing photos. It's happened all throughout history by good guys and bad guys, but we're getting to a place where the democratization of editing tools in a believable way could be dangerous. I don't know. Matt, thoughts? Does I articulate that well?
I'm tracking.
It's funny because it's like I have been thinking about this for years, and I keep thinking, oh, we're on the cusp of this becoming a really big deal, this becoming like really bad, and then like another year goes by and nothing really bad happened. Small
It's a
bad
big
things
nothing
happen.
burger.
I mean, there's a
Small
lot
bad
of female
things.
celebrities out there that would, disagree with my sentiment right now, but there's not really been any sort of big world-changing situations to come from this sort of visual effects technology coming out.
Has anyone ever
But-
deepfaked you?
Other than us, no.
Somebody deepfaked you, Destin.
They did.
But that's another thing. Our phones are now able to do deepfake stuff. Like Snapchat can now do rudimentary, or what was that, face swap? Where you just like, it's literally doing a live face replacement, and it's not very good right now. But what happens when it does become good?
It will become good.
It will, exactly. It's not a matter
It will
of if,
be
it's
as good
when.
as Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian, and that will happen quickly.
It's going to happen way sooner than anyone realizes. Like, everyone's like, oh yeah, that's years away. I'm like, this might happen in 2022. Like, this might happen next year. I've been putting a lot more experience points into doing sort of like mobile-based video VFX stuff, like real-time camera tracking and CGI rendering just happening entirely on my phone has kind of been my current obsession, because it's starting to reach a threshold where it's looking good enough to share. Like, before now, it was always kind of like a dumb little novelty, like, oh, cool, there's a little 3D object in your scene, but it doesn't look good at all or anything, whatever. But now we're getting like real shadows on the ground. The camera tracking is getting so flawless. You can import characters with animations now.
So that video you did the other day on your Twitter account where you had this big one wheel at the top of a mountain and you were walking around it and you had your small one wheel there. Are you telling me you did that on your phone?
100% never touched
Shut
the computer.
up.
Yeah. So I'm using this app called Polycam to 3D.
Well, that confirms the thesis that we're close on all of this.
Yeah, and it's
All
like
of it being mobile.
you can now scan the world. I'm using an app to be able to scan real life objects and turn them into 3D models. And it's still at the earliest stages right now, but it's able to determine sort of material properties, texture channels, stuff like that, like the reflectivity and the roughness and the specularity and color of these maps, so that it actually reacts to light differently. Because when you normally do a photo scan, you're just getting the color information. And so you'll have like this 3D object based off of a real thing, but you have the lighting that was in that situation baked into the 3D model, because it's just taking pictures and projecting them onto 3D geometry. But now we're getting to a point where they're able to figure out what those materials should do when hit by light.
You're taking pictures on different levels. So it's kind of like LiDAR, but it's like if you had the ability, you say, what is the spectral reflectivity of this? How does this material respond to blue light versus red light? But the big one is if you could do all the spectrum. Wow.
Yeah, and so it's like and the computer is just doing this and figuring out, because this is beyond the skill ability of a person. Doesn't matter how talented.
Dude, you just opened up another, like, holy cow. Like, that's a huge deal. Butterfly wings react differently to yellow light than they do other colors of light. That's why morphos are blue, because they have little optical antennas. And so the holy grail of what you're talking about technologically would be a LiDAR, a multispectral LiDAR that has all the colors that the human eye, specifically the three cones in the human eye, if you could measure the reflectivity and the spectral response to each of those channels that cones see in the human eye, that's it. If you had a camera that did that, you could completely recreate photorealism, couldn't you?
I mean, probably. Right now, basically, it's discerning depth in a model by seeing the same image from different points of view. When you photo scan something, you take hundreds of photos from as many possible different angles around the real life thing as possible. And up until now, it's just being able to track. It's able to track a specific pixel on your object, like let's say this little dot, and it's able to see and triangulate the position of that point across all these different photos. And because of that triangulation, it's able to figure out depth and therefore build the 3D model. But now we're getting to a point where it's able to figure out, oh, this is the same spot, but from this angle, that spot suddenly gets very bright. Because the Fresnel of the light is hitting it at just the right way, suddenly it's getting more reflective. And as you continue to go around it, you're able to get more data points on that reflectivity, and then you get all of that out, and it's able to figure out, oh, then this certain spot right here on this object has this level of reflectivity, and then you do that for the whole thing. So now you can shine a light on it, and this reflective part of the real-life object now as a 3D model will react the same way it does in reality. And it's all so early days right now. Apple literally just released this API called Object Capture because they see the future as being all in AR and VR. They're going to release a headset next year. And so they think that, the future of VR stuff, there needs to be content. We got to make the tools so that anyone can just create this stuff. And so they made literally the best photo scanning tool out there, but it's just an API. And so there's a few companies that are implementing their API into their programs. And that's like literally just happening over the last 5-6 months. This has been a thing so far, and it's just going to get better. It's going to be easier to use. Like you're saying, I think for the butterfly wings, you can kind of recreate that right now by dialing in the settings specifically, and that's like high level sort of settings. Now you're having to deal with the index of refraction across different color channels and all of that sort of stuff. That's kind of beyond me. You can absolutely recreate a butterfly wing, but you have to do it manually. And I 100% believe we are quickly approaching the point where I can just take I can go to a biology lab where they've got the little butterflies, on the little pins and the little picture frame, and I could spend a minute and a half and just with an app on my phone and just, orbit around the butterfly just from standing in front of the picture frame on the wall and be able to see it from all these different angles with lights coming from different directions. And then, 10 minutes later, I have it on my phone and it's the butterfly, optically correct. It's nuts.
Matt, land the plane for us, man. I could keep going. We've got to cut Ren loose so he can go do his VFX work for the day.
Well, even just what you're talking about there, the potential to make what in the past people tried to invent with steam, like replicating animals. One of the stories about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and some of the kings and palaces of the East that the old Greek historians pre-Jesus reported was that they had found ways to make metal versions of animals, that people had metal zoos that they had crafted that were like alchemical almost, this hybrid of engineering and some sort of hidden heat magic. And nobody knew what to attribute it to.
Okay.
But this is part of what captured the mind of the whole steampunk subgenre of fiction and visual artistry and all of that.
Okay,
business.
sure, yeah.
Like if you could go and sample and scan every micro detail of even just the externals of some kind of an animal, like that's kind of just fun for me as a side jaunt here mentally to think about. Like you could make an entire zoo of mechanized, steam-driven, artificial animalia. You could make a menagerie that is built that way with such specificity that even in the physical world, this thing could get that much closer to passing for something that looks like something from the natural world and maybe even something that's gone. Like to create a living, functioning, moving expression of something that maybe you have taxiderm samples of, but we don't have any of the original. I mean,
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, but a different avenue to get there. So all of this conversation, like I bring up that last point to say, man, it just makes your imagination run wild with what could be, what you could make. Just in listening to you here, I have ranged from we could make a completely believable cryptozoology, extinct animal zoo that is mechanical but looks otherwise in the future. And you could go to this zoo and you could interact with the creatures and, it'd be so fascinating. I've ranged all the way from that type of interesting futuristic wonder to like, dang, we get much further down that road. We could just do everything in a pod. If we were suspended in liquid, our muscles wouldn't atrophy as fast. We could stimulate them with electricity, and we could just interact in this hyper-realistic virtual world forever. Like, total dystopia to total futuristic, optimistic wonder, all in one conversation.
I too am looking forward to the new Matrix movie.
I am. Absolutely.
That's where you go. Yeah, it's an interesting place where it feels like, for most of human history, story has been over here in this other component. It provides some kind of order, some kind of moral framework, some type of shared touchstone that we can all relate to across society. And now it feels like our unending appetite for story, which I think is a very good thing and a very human thing and a very unifying thing and a very powerful thing. It feels more and more like that unending interest in story, passion for story, is something that is inching toward crossing the line from something fantastical that we enjoy as an escape, but like we all know what we're doing here, towards something that more and more resembles actuality. And one of the next big philosophical, moral, existential questions that I think philosophers and ethicists, people who think about this stuff, are going to have to wrestle with is, at what point are we into a completely new era of story in terms of how it affects us, how it shapes us, the technological media we use to encounter it? Because I think that realism is awesome and amazing and fun, and I just can't get enough of this kind of stuff. I also think it is a fundamentally different proposition in terms of our interaction with the narratives that make us, to do it the way we're doing it now and the way it looks like it's headed, versus the way we've done it for all of human history.
Yeah.
This is a different exercise, and it's going to take us to new places in terms of who we are and how we relate to each other in the big, grand, shared human story. So that's where my head's been.
Yeah, I mean, in the macro scale of time in human history, we are literally being hit by a shockwave.
Yes.
And we're seeing it in slow motion, but it's a shockwave nonetheless. It's hitting us so hard and so fast that we're incapable of doing anything about it. We're just now on the whims of whatever the shockwave is going to do to us. And traditionally, when you're hit by a shockwave, it doesn't really work out well for you. It's scary to consider, and hopefully we're able to just continue being okay.